Welcome to This Explainer. You know, if you're the kind of focused learner who's hungry to understand how history actually unfolds, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're looking at how an impossibly bold, honestly almost suicidal heist managed to topple the largest pre-Columbian empire on Earth. We're talking about the fall of the Inca. It's a story of raw ambition, betrayal, and empires literally rising and falling in real time. Now, I want you to really think about this number, 168. That is the exact number of Spanish conquistadors led by Francisco Pizarro, who marched into the harsh Andes Mountains in 1532. Just 168 men. I mean, on paper, they were practically a rounding error in the grand scheme of military history. But then, contrast that with this staggering figure, 10 million. They were stepping into an empire of 10 million people. It spanned over 2.5 million square kilometers. This wasn't some loosely connected group of villages. It was an incredibly advanced, wealthy, highly organized civilization with fearsome military power. This was a society that fully, 100% expected to prosper for thousands of years. Okay, let's dive into this, because the central mystery of our explainer today is figuring out exactly how a tiny band of 168 guys conquered an empire of 10 million people without being instantly wiped off the map. As we'll see, it wasn't just about military might. It was more like a perfect storm of unbelievable luck, an out-of-control bioweapon, and just sheer psychological warfare.
Section 1. The Ultimate Ambush. The Battle of Cajamarca.
To really understand how this happened, our story brings us to a highland town called Cajamarca. Pizarro realized pretty quickly that he had walked directly into a massive, completely unavoidable trap. He was totally surrounded. Camped just outside the city were approximately 80,000 heavily armed, fearsome Inca warriors. But the Inca Emperor Atahualpa, well, he was supremely overconfident. In a move that would ultimately seal the fate of his entire empire, Atahualpa actually left the vast majority of his army outside the city. He rode into the central plaza on a massive litter to meet the Spanish, surrounded by about 6,000 attendants, musicians, and dancers. And crucially, almost all of them were completely unarmed.
So when the emperor arrives in this strangely deserted plaza, he isn't met by Pizarro. Instead, a lowly friar named Valverde approaches him, hands him a Bible, and demands he convert to Christianity. The emperor, who had literally never seen a book before in his life, just tosses it aside. And that perceived disrespect? That was the trigger. The Spanish launched their ambush, unleashing technologies that were completely alien and terrifying to the Inca. They fired these unwieldy early guns called arquebuses and small cannons known as falconets. Then came the war horses, creatures the Inca had never even conceptualized, acting like unstoppable charging forces in the chaotic plaza, all while European steel armor easily deflected standard Inca blows.
The sheer disparity of this ambush is genuinely shocking. In the slaughter that followed, 3,000 Inca died right there in the plaza. The number of Spanish conquistadors lost? 0. Absolutely 0. But see, Pizarro didn't just want to win a bloody skirmish. He purposefully sliced his way through the crowd to keep Atahualpa alive. By capturing the semi-divine emperor, Pizarro paralyzed that 80,000-strong army waiting outside. It was a catastrophic psychological blow that sent the remaining Inca forces fleeing in absolute panic.
Section 2. A Shattered Empire. The Invisible Vanguard.
Let's move to the background and see how this builds, starting years before Pizarro even showed up. Because that unbelievable victory at Cajamarca, it was really only possible because the Inca Empire was already crumbling from the inside. An out-of-control bioweapon, smallpox, had hitched a ride down South American trade routes as early as 1524. The Inca had absolutely zero immunity to it. This silent killer wiped out tens of thousands of people, and that included the previous emperor, Huayna Capac, and his immediate heir, which, as you can imagine, left a massive gaping power vacuum right at the very top of the empire.
And you know what happens with power vacuums. It triggered a devastating 3-year civil war between two surviving sons. On one side, you had Huáscar, who was backed by the Cusco nobility. On the other side was Atahualpa, heavily supported by the military generals. Now, Atahualpa ultimately won the war, but the cost was staggering. The nobility was fractured, the army was completely battered, and the everyday citizens were just exhausted. So Pizarro didn't defeat a thriving unified empire. He practically walked into the aftermath of a localized apocalypse.
Section 3. The Bait and Switch. The Emperor's Ransom.
Which brings us right back to our captive emperor in Cajamarca. Recognizing that his captors were totally obsessed with wealth, Atahualpa attempted to negotiate his freedom with an unprecedented, truly world-historic ransom. He literally offered to fill his entire holding cell with pure, solid gold and then fill 2 adjoining rooms with silver. And remarkably, he kept his word. Within just 2 months, priceless artifacts from across the entire empire were carted in and melted down into $500 million of bullion in today's money. But the gold-hungry conquistadors quickly realized a major problem. Taking the money was easy, but freeing a living god who commanded legions of angry warriors, that was a tactical nightmare.
So the crucial point is how the Spanish dealt with this. They executed a brutal, shameless bait and switch. They set up a completely rigged trial, officially charging Atahualpa with worshipping false idols, practicing polygamy, which by the way were both just standard parts of his own culture, and get this, treason against the Spanish king he had never even met. They even baptized him as Francisco to supposedly reduce his sentence and then immediately executed him by garroting.
Section 4. Puppets and Rebellions. Controlling Cusco.
Alright, so with the emperor dead, Pizarro needed to capture the actual capital of the empire, the city of Cusco. Borrowing a playbook straight from Hernando Cortés, who had previously conquered the Aztecs, he posed as a liberator to the fractured native factions and implemented a puppet strategy. Pizarro started installing native emperors that he thought he could control. The first guy, Atahualpa, died mysteriously after just 2 weeks. So, Pizarro then appoints a 17-year-old named Manco Inca. Manco actually enthusiastically allied with the Spanish, but purely for his own political convenience. He wanted to use Spanish muscle to exterminate his surviving rivals from that recent civil war. It was, for a fleeting moment, a match made in conquistador heaven.
And this brilliantly illustrates the true reality of the conquest. When Manco Inca finally realized he was just a disrespected mascot to the Spanish, he rebelled, and he laid siege to Cusco with 100,000 warriors. The Spanish only survived this massive, overwhelming onslaught because their tiny force of about 200 Europeans was augmented by 30,000 native warriors fighting alongside them. When you really look at it, the fall of the Inca was, in many ways, an ongoing Inca civil war that was just masterfully manipulated by Spanish invaders.
Section 5. Thieves Falling Out. The Conquistadors' Civil War.
So, having weathered that siege and seemingly broken the back of the main Inca resistance, you'd think the conquistadors would finally settle down to govern, right? Nope. Instead, they immediately began murdering each other over the spoils. The next decade is just a dizzying, incredibly violent blur of assassinations. The Pizarro brothers fought against their former partner, Diego Almagro, and executed him in 1538. 3 years later, Almagro's son gets revenge by orchestrating the bloody murder of Francisco Pizarro in his own palace. By 1546, the situation was so wildly out of control that Gonzalo Pizarro actually defeated and beheaded the first viceroy sent over by the Spanish crown. I mean, it was total, utter chaos.
Now, the root of this rogue rebellion was the Spanish crown's attempt to pass the new laws. These laws aimed to strip the conquistadors of their encomiendas, which were basically these pocket-sized fiefdoms built entirely on forced indigenous labor. The Spanish crown finally managed to regain control, but interestingly, not with an army. They sent a priest, Pedro de la Gasca. He came in and offered full pardons to any rebel who laid down their arms, effectively letting them keep their wealth. And just like that, the conquistador civil wars ended.
Section 6. The Inca Legacy. Echoes in the Andes.
While the Spanish were busy tearing each other apart for decades, you have to wonder, what happened to the remnants of the Inca civilization? Now, what's really interesting about this is the dark, tragic irony of it all. After fleeing Cusco, Manco Inca established a secret jungle kingdom in Vilcabamba, known as the Neo-Inca state. He actually offered shelter to renegade Spanish fugitives from the Almagro faction, literally the very men who would later murder him over a drunken argument. It wasn't until 1572 that Viceroy Toledo finally launched a massive campaign to crush this hidden state, capturing and executing the last Inca emperor, Tupac Amaru.
The execution of Tupac Amaru marked the official end of the empire on paper, but it's absolutely vital to remember what you should take away from this. The civilization didn't simply vanish. What echoes of the Inca Empire still survive in the Andes today? Well, millions of people still speak Quechua, the imperial language. The culture endures through beautiful syncretic religious festivals. And physically, the very foundations of the Spanish colonial palaces rest directly upon masterful Inca mountain stonework, stones the Spanish simply couldn't figure out how to move if they tried. So considering their roots are literally still holding up the Andes, did the Inca Empire ever truly fall?